Hello and welcome to New Central Studios. I'm Felicity Ezewike, here with the stories making the rounds beyond the continent. We'll begin the news with conflict in the Middle East, where UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has warned that Lebanon is on the brink, cautioning against its transformation into another Gaza amidst escalating violence in the region. Speaking at the 79th UN General Assembly, Guterres highlighted the growing conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, Lebanon's Iran-backed militant group, which threatens to plunge the region into all-out war. He also condemned the global rise in impunity, calling it politically indefensible and morally intolerable.
Meanwhile, Gaza is a non-stop nightmare that threatens to take the entire region with it. Look no further than Lebanon. We should all be alarmed by the escalation. Lebanon is at the brink. The people of Lebanon, the people of Israel, and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza. Excellencies, the level of impunity in the world is politically indefensible and morally intolerable. Today, a growing number of governments and others feel entitled to get out of jail free card. They can trample international law. They can violate the United Nations Charter. They can turn a blind eye to international human rights conventions or the decisions of international courts.
US President Joe Biden has told the UN General Assembly that Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine has failed, urging continued support for Kyiv until victory is achieved. Addressing global conflict, Biden cautioned against a full-scale war in Lebanon as Israel targets Hezbollah, stressing that escalation is in no one's interest. While acknowledging the severity of the situation, he underscored the potential for a diplomatic solution. He further called for a ceasefire and a hostage release agreement between Israel and Hamas to end the war in Gaza.
The good news is Putin's war has failed and at his core aim. He set out to destroy Ukraine, but Ukraine is still free. He set out to weaken NATO, but NATO is bigger, stronger, and more united than ever before, with two new members, Finland and Sweden. But we cannot let up. Now is the time for the parties to finalize its terms, bring the hostages home, and secure security for Israel and Gaza free of Hamas' grip, ease the suffering in Gaza, and end this war.
Meanwhile, Lebanon's health minister, Firaz Abeid, on Tuesday says the death toll from Israeli strikes has risen to 558, including 50 children and 94 women. The update comes as Israel announced new airstrikes and Hezbollah strongholds in Lebanon. He said a total of 1,835 people were wounded. Hezbollah and his arch-foe Israel have been exchanging near-daily cross-border fire since the Gaza war erupted last October.
المحدثة لوزارة الصحة للاعتداءات اللي صارت وخاصة لاعتداءات امبارح. نحن لحديت هاللحظة هاي وزارة الصحة صارت مسجلة 558 شهيد، بينهم 50 طفل و94 امرأة.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to continue Israel's airstrike against Hezbollah as Israeli jets intensify the bombardment of the Iran-backed Lebanese group's positions. Netanyahu emphasized that the war is not with the people of Lebanon, but with Hezbollah.
להכות בחיזבאללה. אנחנו נמשיך להכות בחיזבאללה. ואני אומר לעם בלבנון, המלחמה שלנו לא איתכם, המלחמה שלנו עם חיזבאללה. נסראללה מוביל אתכם לסף התהום. אמרתי לכם אתמול להתפנות מהבתים שבהם הוא שם לכם טיל בסלון ורקטה בגראז'. מי שיש לו טיל בסלון ורקטה בגראז' לא יהיה לו בית. אבל אני אומר לכם דבר נוסף, הוא גורם לכך שהמדינה שלכם נמצאת בסכנה. תשתחררו מהלפיתה של חיזבאללה.
In Europe, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New York on Tuesday, marking their third bilateral meeting this year. According to Zelensky, the relationship between Ukraine and India is dynamically evolving, with both leaders working to strengthen cooperation in various sectors. The primary focus of their discussion was enhancing collaboration on international platforms such as UN and G20, advancing the peace formula and preparing for the second peace summit. I want a short break. The news continues right after. Do stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. Earlier, we told you that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to continue Israel's airstrikes against Hezbollah. Let's cross over now live to News Central's senior international correspondent, Adeshawa Josh, who joins us from Istanbul. Adeshawa, Israel has vowed to continue its escalation in Lebanon. Are we likely to see a consensus among world leaders to end the crisis as the UN General Assembly kicks off today?
The first three leaders who spoke at the UN General Assembly earlier today all touched on the escalating conflict in Lebanon and decried the death toll that is now due to surpass 600 by morning, according to experts. They all said this must stop. They've all called on it to stop, but they all fell short of calling out Israel in particular to say Israel must stop firing those rockets and must stop the civilian casualties that we have seen in the past couple of days. But there was one leader who spoke very directly to the situation, and that's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, who condemned the continuous bombardment of what he describes as civilian targets. Remember, Israel keeps using the word targeted attacks, but we have seen also in the past couple of days, even if we're not convinced about the death toll and civilian casualties in Gaza, we have also seen that almost 150 women and children have been killed in the past couple of days. And we have also seen Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau saying that that is absolutely unacceptable. So each of these leaders are now beginning to come out outright on their own to say, we cannot afford a full-blown war. President Biden also said a full-scale war in Lebanon is not acceptable. But the problem is, who is going to stop it, Felicity?
I think we have all the strong words being said, but actions seem to be falling short. What are you thinking about possible action by the world leaders instead of this talk shop that we seem to have?
Well, the possible action has to be a consensus. And if it must happen at the UN General Assembly and, of course, at the UN Security Council. A consensus must be reached. There must be, obviously, voting at the UNSC. And we have seen a couple of resolutions in the past couple of months that were supposed to contain Israeli attacks in both Gaza and now Lebanon. But Israel has one way or the other defied these resolutions. And listening to UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, he did mention, without calling out Israel, saying that it is unacceptable that we're now living in a world where international courts of justice that have generally guided the behaviors of leaders in the international community is now being blatantly violated or disobeyed in the name of self-defense, Felicity. It is unclear what is going to happen next, but the escalation in Lebanon seems to be ongoing and the death toll is rising every minute.
Thank you very much, Adesha, for speaking with us. All right. We're on a short break. The news continues right after. Just stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. You're still watching Beyond the Continent here on News Central. We cross now live to our continuing coverage of the UN General Assembly, the 79th session. We're joined by Bernard Akede, who is in New York and joins us for further updates. This time, I want to talk about the speech given by the U.S. President. Bernard, if you can hear me, just go ahead and give us some of the key highlights that is being talked about.
All right, thank you for having me, Felicity. I think the major conversation today has been the speech given by the United States President Joe Biden. Basically, Joe Biden spoke this morning. He was the second speaker this morning, following the president of Brazil, and it was a holistic speech, if I do say so myself. There were there were some skepticisms about what Joe Biden was going to say. First of all, bearing in mind that this is going to be his last United Nations General Assembly, which he will be attending as the President of the United States of America, knowing that elections will take place in November and he will not be contesting. Now, I think at the beginning of the speech, Joe Biden, first of all, read, I would say his resume, and quite an impressive one, if I do say so myself, joining proper governance of the United States in the 70s, and then he grew through the ranks. He talked about participating in apartheid in South Africa, fighting apartheid in South Africa, speaking up about it. He talked about some of the strides that he had taken through or up until he became the president of the United States. Talked about the battles that the country had fought under him, whether as president or not, and largely talked about the achievements of the United States government in general. Talked about where naysayers had come attacking the United States government and how they had been able to overcome many of these challenges. But I think largely what many people were waiting to hear from him was his stance on, the battle between Israel and Palestine, the battle in Gaza, where I think, based on what I heard and how I see it, he played a very political card in there. The American president, did call out both sides. First of all, he complained about Israel's involvement and Israel's participation and Israel's bombardment of Gaza, and he also did complain and call out the role that Palestine had played as well, talking about Hezbollah and other terrorist groups. And well, he did call for peace in the region generally. And yes, he did receive some applause here and there, received some standing ovation here and there, but he was very political in calling this out. I'll also go on to say that he did also mention that the rest of the world, particularly the richer countries of the world, need to support the developing countries of the world. He talked about the support that America had given, particularly to Africa, in terms of healthcare, medical services. He talked about over 700 million vaccines given to African countries and developing countries for COVID. He talked about the Mpox vaccine, about 1 million of those also being given out. And other things that the world has, that America has been doing. But I'll quickly wrap up by this one. Now, he touched on artificial intelligence, AI, and that is a very huge one. Now, America is pushing out an agenda on artificial intelligence, AI, and that's because it's a topic that is still not completely explored. Now, AI has its positives and has its negatives, and the President Joe Biden, while talking about being excited with the positives that AI has, he also talked about the responsibilities or how responsible governments of the world would have to be, because AI is still very untapped. So the possibilities are numerous, are endless, but then the challenges that may come with the wrong use of AI are also there. And then, he wrapped up by putting out a message to other world leaders. And I think that this message should resonate with African leaders, where he said, governance is about the government, but it's for the people, and not the other way around. And I think that's something that particularly African leaders should take away. He said he would have loved to continue ruling as the president. He made the hard decision not to run for presidency, but that he loves the country more than ruling the country. So he's stepping aside for other people to take charge.
All right, Bernard, I'll come back to you, but let's bring in Adeshowa again. Adeshowa, I don't know if you heard a bit of what Bernard, his submission of President Biden's speech at the UN General Assembly. One of the key things that stood out for me was him saying that Biden played a bit of politics, in his view, with his submission and his ceasefire, calling for hostage release and saying, cautioning against a full-scale war in Lebanon. What is your thinking about his submission and the politics angle that Bernard brought up?
So President Biden is an 81-year-old elder statesman who's been in the business of running his country for decades now. And he came to the assembly with the mindset of it's going to be his last time as president. And so he, having listened to other world leaders and a couple of speeches that had gone before him, which sounded pretty bleak of the world, how climate change is changing the world, how the world's conflict is going to burn the whole place down, for lack of a better word. And then Biden coming in, just walking in and saying, look, I have been through some of the most difficult times in the world in my time as an 81-year-old. Through the Vietnam War, apartheid in South Africa, and even the Cold War. And I can tell you for sure that things does get better, provided we make the right decision. And that's how he started his speech, more or less a very, very ironical way of saying, if we make the right decision, the world will not burn down. But if we don't make the right decision, then it's possible that the escalation in Lebanon may fall into a full-blown war. And that was where he began by saying, condemning Hamas for attacking Israel on October the 7th. And he also said Hezbollah did the same thing on October 8th, began to pound Israel. Clearly, we know where Israel, U.S. stands when it comes to Israel, this unflinching support for Israel. And the United States has said many times, including Biden himself, that no matter what, the United States will always support Israel's ability to defend itself, but has also called on a ceasefire, has called Israel and Hamas to sit down and sign the peace agreement that has, become an elusive process in the past couple of weeks and months, actually. So we see a man who knows that. I'm
inferring from your submission that you kind of agree that it's more of a scorecard for him, considering the length of time he's been in leadership.
That's right, because you see, he came in there pretty much relaxed. His old, some experts will say his old grandpa self saying, guys, I've seen it all. It always gets to this point, and then we always figure it out. As long as we make the right decision, as long as we sit at the table and have these conversations, everything is going to be all right. On the other side of the net, it doesn't look that way, because people are dying. Young people, women, children, innocent folks are dying because, according to experts, the United States is not taking the kind of leadership we expect it to take when it comes to Israel, which is tell Israel to stop. And the U.S. has defended that position so many times. We do not get involved in the local politics of Israel, but as an ally, we would support Israel's decision to defend itself.
All right, let's go back to Bernard quickly. What, if you can, if this is not putting you on the spot, is there a running theme that all the world leaders have talked about that was echoed by Biden, aside the conflict in Israel and Ukraine?
Well, aside the conflict in Israel and Ukraine, I think a running theme would be being able to achieve the SDGs, starting with 2030. And I know the SDGs, there are a number of them. So different world leaders picked out several ones that they felt should be achieved or that they felt their countries would achieve. But besides that, I think it's difficult to take the conversation away from world peace because largely that's like the biggest thing that's happening right now. Just like Adeshewa said, we've talked about Israel and Gaza, and now we're looking at Lebanon. It could escalate to anything else. Let's not forget that going on 3 years, we still have Russia and Ukraine. So largely, world leaders will be looking at world peace generally, whether they are directly or indirectly or affected by these crises going on in different countries. But I think besides world peace, it was the SDGs.
All right, Adesha, do you have maybe a contrary position aside the SDGs? What other running theme was echoed by Biden that was also talked about by other leaders that caught your attention and you think, we should spotlight a little more?
So basically, just like my colleague said, it is world peace. Without peace, the economy is not going to stabilize. Without good economy, you're going to continue to have groups of people who are discontented with their government, and they will there will be uprisings around the world. So with peace comes a modicum of growth and development, and that was highlighted also in Antonio Guterres' speech, which said, well, it looks like our speech is all revolving around conflict and peace, and that's because these are man-made stuff that could be resolved with some level of political will. All right, so each of the leaders that have spoken today, they all talked about world peace, the conflict that's happening around the world. Then they spoke about climate change. Climate change was the second biggest issue. And in fact, they did say that climate change is something that even though it looks very elusive in terms of curbing it, there was a lot of human contribution, and that is something they know can be rolled back, provided each of the countries around the world do their part. Remember, two main countries contribute up to like 90% of the world carbon emissions, which is China and the United States. I don't remember the last, the third country right now. But those two countries are the biggest contributor. And he encouraged them, he urged them to do something about curbing carbon emissions at this time. Climate change was big. And also the transition from fossil fuel to bioenergy. That was highlighted with the Brazilian president, who said that his country, by the way, is home to the biggest rainforest still intact in the world, home to 24 million people. So he clearly had a lot to say about what his country has been doing to protect that rainforest, to keep it intact, and also the biofuel transition that they have put in place 15 years ago, way before anyone began to talk about clean energy. And he believes that with the right incentive, we can support developing countries to transition at their own pace from fossil fuel to clean energy. And that was when, after that, we began to talk about inequality in the global taxation system. We've seen multilateral organizations taxing developing countries, when they want many developing countries to debt. And some of these leaders want that refuel. This conversation has been on for like 5 years or even way before, but we've not seen a lot of changes in that regard. But but like Bernard said, the biggest story of the day, the biggest theme of the day has been peace around the world, conflict resolution, then down to climate change, and then to inequality and to eradicating food insecurity, and then going down to AI. I would put it that way.
Adesha, thank you very much. That was quite extensive. We appreciate it. We'll just have to let you go now. Thanks for speaking with us, and stay safe. All right, let's come back to Bernard. Bernard, I understand you covered a protest by Sierra Leoneans at the... We have the video of the protest by Sierra Leoneans at the UN General Assembly. We'll take that now.
Now, earlier, Mazino did ask and did mention about other activities going on in around the United Nations General Assembly. It's not just policymakers and world leaders. There also are people who are aggrieved and have their own complaints to pass on to the rest of the world. And now we are here on the 47th Street, I believe, and we have the people from Iran. I'd like you to tell me your name, please, and then explain to us what exactly is going on here.
I'm Azadeh Sami, and there were a lot of us. We're all gathered here today because we are here to protest the presence of the Iranian regime president, Pezeshkian, here at the United Nations. He absolutely has no place here. here, and so there needs to be justice brought forth.
Okay. Now, I'd like you in a few words tell us why you feel that the Iranian president shouldn't be here. What exactly has he done? What is the state of Iran as a country, and what is the position of the people here who are protesting?
Well, the position of the people here who are protesting, we've always tried to be a voice for the people inside Iran. As you can see, all the pictures here are people who have been executed for political reasons by the Iranian regime, and this has been going on for over 4 decades now. And so clearly these people are risking their lives and their families' lives by coming out and protesting against the brutal, theocratic, misogynistic, terroristic regime of Iran. And so we're all here to support them. And basically Pezeshkian, he's only been in office for a few months now, but already under his administration, there have been about 80 people who have been politically executed, including about, I believe, 6 to 10 of them have been women. He also, as someone who has a medical background, I also have a medical background myself, but he has also, in his past, has close ties with the IRGC, which is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran. And he has been an advocate for the forced hijab on the women. When it came time to women who had been brutally executed by the regime, instead of coming out and telling the truth as to how they were executed, particularly if they were physicians, if they were women, he would lie and basically said that they died of natural causes. And this is unacceptable. And this is what we're here to say, that there needs to be justice brought about this.
Yeah. Right. Now, you did mention that certain people have been executed brutally, certain people have disappeared, and that the truth has not been put out by the Iranian government. Now, we're seeing pictures of certain people. I'd like to point at the one of this lady. What can you tell us of some of these people? Starting from this picture we're looking at here, the whole street has pictures of this particular lady. Tell the world what some of these pictures about and who they represent.
Well, they represent women who have really given everything to be the voice for the Iranian people, even though they were living inside Iran and they knew what the risks were. These individuals have either died in political prisoners or in prisons, or they have died in protests. And so they all have different stories here, but they've all died in the name of freedom for Iran, and basically trying to stand with their fellow Iranians in telling the world that we need to stop dealing with the mullahs. We need to stop negotiating with them, stop diplomacy, and we need to support the people in fighting for regime change in Iran. Basically, so that they all have one commonality in that sense, but they all have different stories.
And now, before we leave. This is the United Nations General Assembly. World leaders are gathered here from everywhere, from all over the globe. What is the message of the people here to the rest of the world and to the leaders of the world? Not just the Iranian president, but to all the governments of the world.
So basically the message is we need to have an Iran-US policy that reflects the cries of the Iranian people. They're saying they want regime change. They say no to all forms of dictatorship, whether it was the past dictatorship of the Shah or the current dictatorship of the Iranian regime. So basically that's what we all need to do, is to try to make these voices heard and having that be reflected in the Iran-US policy.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
All right, we still have Bernard. Just a quick one for you, Bernard. Has there been any response to the protest by these individuals?
Well, sadly, there hasn't been any response just yet. I don't think the Iranian president has spoken. Just like the lady there said, remember that there was a plane crash where the former Iranian president passed, and then a new president had assumed office. So far, he has not responded to any of the things mentioned by the protesters here. Besides the Iranians, we also had the people from Bangladesh who also staged the protest. There haven't been any responses yet from the president of Bangladesh towards what his people had complained about. They complained about harsh treatment. They complained about some kind of ethnic cleansing of some tribes in Bangladesh. There's been no response just yet. These are groups of people who have been staging their own protests just outside of the UN General Assembly premises here. It's allowed in this area as long as it's kept civil and safe. I'd like to correct something earlier. You talked about the Sierra Leonean people protesting. Slight mistake there. It wasn't a protest from the the Sierra Leonean people. As a matter of fact, while others were protesting, the Sierra Leoneans here in New York were celebrating, saying that they were pleased with the performance of President Julius Maada Bio. And when we got there, we thought it was a protest, but they said no, it wasn't a protest. They were celebrating the achievements of their own president. Well, the president did speak here eventually later, and he pointed out quite a few things. So no surprise why they were celebrating him. I did ask them if the people back home in Sierra Leone share the same sentiment as those here in New York. And the person who spoke to me said he clearly believes that the sentiment will be the same. As regards the other two country nationals that we spoke to, that's talking about Iran and Bangladesh.
Bernard, thank you very much for that very important clarification. They were celebrating, not protesting, as earlier reported here. Thank you so much for that update. I'm sure we'll be coming back to you for more live feeds on what is happening at the General Assembly. In the meantime, you take care. We'll see you later. And that's where we wrap things up on Beyond the Continent at this hour. We'd like to hear from you. Do send us a message on WhatsApp. The number is showing now on your screen, or you can follow us on social media at News Central TV. You can watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422. We're also on Star Times, Avo TV, and YouTube. Thank you for watching.